I am going to. Good morning, everyone. It is Sunday, October 27th, and we are so lucky to welcome Beth Fishman. And what she is presenting today is Healing to Become Whole, how Jewish families and Jewish communities engage with addiction and recovery. Are you surprised that addiction impacts the Jewish community as much as others in the US? And I just want to tell, and I think I've shared with Beth, sometimes when I bring this up, people say, oh, Vanessa, that doesn't affect the Jewish community. And we're going to talk to you about that today. Did you know that there are treatment programs just for Jewish individuals and families based in Jewish values and teachings, even right here in our area? In anticipation of Adam Nimoy's presentation to our community, November 17th, yes, Leonard Nimoy's son, let's dive into the Jewish experience of addiction, recovery, and healing, considering ways Jewish communities support those who are struggling with addiction and those who have found their way to freedom. Now, someone said, well, how did you find someone? And I said, I went straight to Jewish Children and Family Services. If you haven't, it's a great organization, and Beth can tell you more about it, but I am going to tell you about Beth. She has worked with individuals and families impacted by a wide range of substance use disorders and other addictive behaviors for over 30 years. That's hard to believe, Beth. Dr. Fishman is the program manager of addiction services at JCFS Chicago. In this capacity, she trains Jewish communal professionals about addiction and how to create safe and welcoming organizations, teaches treatment professionals about the cultural and spiritual needs of Jews in recovery, supports Jews and their loved ones before, during, and after treatment, runs groups on Jewish spiritual practices to support addiction recovery, and assists Jewish communities around the country in developing programs to address addiction. Dr. Fishman is licensed as a clinical psychologist in Illinois and New Mexico. You're a very busy person, Beth. So with no further ado, Beth, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. I really am honored and very appreciative, because we don't really often get the opportunity. Well, we do often, but we still don't enough. I'll say it that way. Get the opportunity to talk about addiction in the Jewish community, because, as Vanessa said, there's a misconception that addiction is not a Jewish issue. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to share my screen and bring up my PowerPoint. All right. And Vanessa, you'll let me know.
I will indeed.
How is it looking?
It's not in play mode. It looked better when we practiced.
Yeah, it should be the same. So let me see.
Pinkman has always been a survivor.
Oh, there we go.
All right, let's just get back to the beginning like it should be. Sorry about this. Okay. Never fails.
Listen.
Right?
Yeah. I always pray to the technology gods.
All right. There we go.
I start.
Okay. Thank you for your patience. So as I said, we do get the opportunity to speak about addiction in the Jewish community, but it's simply never enough, because there is this misconception that addiction is not a Jewish issue. So to begin, I want to ask you to look at the people in this picture. So we see in this picture, we see a couple of men wearing their kippot, their yarmulkes. We see folks dancing in a circle. Maybe it's at a simcha, like a wedding, or maybe it's at services like Simchat Torah, so a joyous occasion in the Jewish community, certainly. What's interesting, though, about this, if you look at the words, is that it says recovery happens here. This is not, in fact, at a wedding. This is, if you look up here in the left top corner where I'm circling with my pointer, this is the homepage for a place called Beit Tshuva, which is in Los Angeles. Beit Tshuva meaning the House of Return or the House of Repentance. This is a Jewish addiction treatment program, a residential Jewish addiction treatment program. And in fact, it's the one that Adam Nimoy is affiliated with. He's on the board of directors of Beit Tshuva, and he taught filmmaking there for a number of years. Beit Tshuva has been in existence for at least 35 years, I believe longer than that. They are always full, and it's a large program. They always have a wait list. They have scholarship beds. They do a lot of fundraising for folks. Jews from all over the world go to Beit Tshuva for treatment. So I would imagine that Beit Tshuva would not be there if there wasn't a need in the Jewish community for addiction treatment. And I'll mention that Beit Tshuva was started by Mark Borovitz, who was a rabbi and very open about his own addiction recovery, and Harriet Rosetto. They're a married couple. She's a social worker. And they met when Harriet was running a halfway house for Jewish men coming out of prison who were needing to get into addiction recovery. And at some point thereafter, Rabbi Mark became a rabbi, and they opened Beit Tshuva together. Additionally, if you look here in this left-hand corner, this is the homepage for the Jewish Addiction Awareness Network. This is a website and an organization started by a woman named Marla Kaufman out of Orange County, California, after her son, who was a teenager and then a young adult, really struggling with substance misuse, lots of different substances, had some difficulty getting into recovery, as often happens, but he ultimately did. He's doing great now. And she felt like there just wasn't enough out there for the Jewish community, and rightly so. The Jewish Addiction Awareness Network started about 8 years ago, I would say, and it's an amazing resource for national Jewish recovery. And then there is, as Vanessa mentioned, the Tikva Center for Jewish Recovery and Healing, which is here in Northbrook. This was started by Rabbi Cantor Dr. Rob Jury about 3 years ago, I'm thinking. And it's to serve the needs of Jews who are in recovery or who are needing to be in recovery or struggling with addiction all over the Midwest. It's the only Jewish treatment program in the entire Midwest. And then, of course, there's the program that I'm the manager of, Addiction Services at JCFS Chicago. And our mission is to ensure that Jewish individuals and families who are struggling with addiction or who are celebrating their recovery find the information and support that they need within the Jewish community. And we've gone so far, in fact, as to publish a high holiday addiction recovery guide for individuals in recovery or for synagogues who want to bring addiction recovery into their high holiday observances in one way or another. So I think this tells us that addiction is certainly an issue in the Jewish community. Now, it's not real easy to gather statistics so that we have really concrete numbers, but there are some studies. One, which was published in 2016 on North American Jewry, so including Canada. And that study found that almost 15% of the Jews who participated said that they could not get through the day without using drugs. And that 41% of the folks who participated know someone within the Jewish community. 41% knew someone within the Jewish community who is currently misusing substances. And there is in Israel an organization called the Israel Center on Addiction, which right there tells you that there's a need. And they did a study nationally in Israel in 2022 and found, interestingly, almost the same percentage, that 14% of Israelis at that time were suffering from some form of addiction. And of course, that was before last October 7th of 23. And we know for sure that rates of addiction have really skyrocketed in Israel because of the trauma of the massacre and the subsequent war and all of the bereavement. So given that addiction is an issue in the Jewish community, we're going to talk about what even is addiction. We'll ask the question, how is addiction a family disease? And then we'll visit the Jewish experience of addiction and recovery. We'll mention briefly how each one of you can be helpful. And what does a welcoming synagogue community look like? And then we'll have time for questions after. So what is addiction? We're going to start answering that question by hearing from a young woman named Tori. She's not Jewish, but her story encapsulates so many of the common characteristics of a family with parental addiction. A little bit later, we'll hear more about families where there is a teen or a child who has the problem with substances. But in this case, with Tori, it was her mom, and this seemed fitting given that you'll be hearing from Adam Nimoy, and he talks about the situation with his father, Leonard, having the addiction problem. So let's hear this short video from Tori. And there may be an ad at the beginning. I'll skip it as soon as I can. It seems 50-50 whether the ad comes up. So if it does, forgive me, I'll get rid of it as quick as I can.
Hi, baby girl. Tori Brinkman has always been a survivor, born 15 weeks early, a tiny pound and a half, and that was just the beginning of her struggle. For the first 10 years of her life, she lived with a mother addicted to heroin. Their history together shows how savage the grip of addiction can be. Today, Tori is a remarkably composed 14-year-old telling her story, her way. What do you remember about those early years and your mom?
She never ate. She'd have maybe a Coke a day, no water, and then go right back to bed. And she'd never take care of me, never feed me. I had to feed myself. I consider myself as the parent and my mom the kid.
Do you think your mom sold drugs?
Yeah, I know she did.
She got in trouble for that?
Yeah. One time, I think I was around 7 or 8, she actually made me do a drug deal for her.
A drug deal? Like, what did she ask you to do?
She put some, either heroin or cocaine in a napkin or something, and she said, run up to that house, go get the money, and give this to them.
Tori says she never got any health care growing up.
None until I was 10. Never went to the dentist. I had never been to the dentist before.
What about pediatrician, doctor? No?
Nothing.
Her mom told Tori not to tell anyone about the things she saw in their home, but Tori would call her grandparents when they ran out of food. 3 years ago, Lillian and Richard were awarded legal custody.
When she first came to live with us permanently, she was blaming herself. Maybe if I was better, Mom wouldn't have done the drugs.
And it wasn't just Tori's mom abusing heroin in their home, it was also her uncle, the closest person Tori had to a father figure. What happened to your uncle?
He passed away November 20th, 2015 from a drug overdose.
Heroin? That must have been super hard for you.
Yeah, because, I mean, he basically took care of me instead of my mom. Like, if my mom was asleep, he'd take care of me. And so it was just, it was sad. Hang on.
You want a Kleenex? I have one.
I got one over here.
Okay. Come here.
This is really hard stuff to talk about.
At 14 years old, Tori has seen enough pain for a lifetime, making her spirit and attitude today all the more impressive.
Here's a big question.
Okay.
Why are you talking to us?
Because I want to spread awareness of how drugs have not only affected my life, but have probably affected a lot of other kids' lives, and I want to just, like, help people.
Tori's mother knows that she's sharing this story. She's been sober now for 3 years. She's working 2 jobs. Tori tells us that she's proud of her mother, and the two of them see each other every week. And Lester, with nearly 1 million people in the U.S. saying that they admit to using heroin, that means there are hundreds of thousands of stories like Tori's.
I'm just blown away.
So it's a hard story to hear. But I felt it was important because Tori brings up so many of the common characteristics, like I mentioned. For example, the secrecy. She mentioned that her mother said, don't tell anybody what you see here in the house. Very common that parents who are struggling with addiction don't want other folks to know and don't want to know what's happening inside the home. That Tori blamed herself, that's actually true of children, where whenever parents or families are struggling, children do tend to blame themselves. That's certainly true when there's parental addiction. And that role reversal where she said, I had to feed myself. I thought of myself as a parent and my mother as a child. Very, very common with parental addiction. And all of the losses and the separations that Tori has experienced, the most obvious, of course, being the loss of her dear uncle, where this very composed 14-year-old young woman really so bereaved at the loss of her uncle, but also despite the fact that she is incredibly lucky, of course, that her grandparents have a home that she could come to, that she's living in a stable environment with them, that they welcomed her and love her. She still lost her first home. She lost her home with her mother. That was her home. And in a way, she lost her mother. I mean, thank goodness her mother survived heroin addiction, which is not something one can count on. But still, their relationship will most likely suffer for the rest of their lives in one way or another. Tori was obviously neglected, no medical care, no dental care. So lots of very common themes in her story that we would see in just about any family where there is parental addiction.
Way she's 14,
Yeah.
wise beyond her years, but
Absolutely.
then think of what she's seen.
So when we think about Tori's mother's behavior and we say addiction is a disease, addiction is an illness, addiction is a disease just like any other illness, any other chronic illness. And we can very easily think to ourselves when we think about the choices that Tori's mother made and her behavior, we can think addiction doesn't seem like an illness, right? It seems like somebody was making some really bad decisions. She decided to involve her child in a drug deal. How is that an illness? Some pretty bad behavior, like not feeding her kid. Some pretty bad choices. So we, unfortunately, all of us, I'm sure, know people who have what we consider traditional illnesses, serious illnesses. And these people don't act that way, right? They don't act that way if they have what we consider traditional illnesses. So how is addiction the same thing? Well, let me show you a couple of images. This is an image of a brain from the top down, and on the left side is the healthy brain. And it's sort of nice and plump. The wrinkles that are there are supposed to be there. This is the cortex at the top of the brain. So this is what a brain should look like. And on the right here, we have, it says addicted brain, but this is the brain of someone with a substance use disorder. That's our language now. It's less shaming and stigmatizing language. And we can see that the brain it's shrunken. It has these awful like holes or gouges in it. It's clearly in pretty bad shape. The brain itself is not looking too good. This is a metabolic study of a brain. And again, on the left side, we have a healthy brain. And interestingly, especially with regard to addiction, here at the top, this is the front of the brain. Again, we're looking from the top down. This is the frontal cortex, and there's all this bright yellow means lots of metabolism, lots of brain activity going on there, which is what you want. This means this is the part of the brain where you think about things and make decisions and think thoughts and feel feelings. And on the right, we have the same kind of image, somebody with a cocaine use disorder or a cocaine addiction. And we see these big dark areas where there's no metabolism happening at all, no brain activity, and the bright activity is greatly reduced. So I would suggest, and I think it's really actually very important that we think about the fact that addiction is a disease like every other disease because it's a organ-based disease. It's based in the brain. And it particularly affects parts of the brain that have to do with making decisions, choosing behaviors, making choices. So if we think about something similar, another organ-based disease, let's say asthma, it's based in the lungs. And so what do the lungs do? The lungs breathe. And if the lungs are diseased, then breathing will be affected. Breathing will be diseased, so to speak. So it's exactly the same. With addiction, it's the brain that's diseased, particularly the parts of the brain that have to do with decisions, behaviors, and choices, and feelings and thoughts. And so that's what that part of the brain does. And I hope that when we see somebody who is active in their addiction and they're doing things that seem to be bad decisions, bad behaviors, bad choices, being bad people, basically, we'll think to ourselves now, oh, you know what? Those are the symptoms. Those are the symptoms of the brain disease of addiction. Those are the symptoms. And there's no room for shame and stigma when somebody is demonstrating the symptoms of a chronic, relapsing, potentially fatal disease, which is one of the definitions of addiction. And it isn't just drugs and alcohol that we can be addicted to. We now know that we can be addicted to shopping and spending and exercising and eating. I think that one's probably not a surprise to anybody anymore. Gambling and sports betting, which is going through the roof these days with new laws allowing for a lot more sports betting, as any of you who follow sports, professional sports or college sports, have no doubt seen. And of course, everything having to do with screens. And this really brings up some interesting questions because we all have to do most of these things. Nobody actually has to gamble, but we all do have to shop. We have to buy paper goods for the house. We do have to buy clothes. We do have to spend money to live. We are all at least supposed to exercise, whether we do or not. Certainly, we all have to eat, and many of us have to be on our devices. I certainly do for work. I have to be on my laptop. My daughter's in college, and she has had to be on a device for school since kindergarten. They handed out iPads in kindergarten, and that was a long time ago if she's a college freshman now. So the question is, if we have to do these things, how do we know if it's addiction or not? So here are 3 things to look for to know if a behavior is falling under the definition of addiction or not. First, the 3 C's. There's actually 5 C's, but we're only going to talk about 3 today. The first is consuming. That addiction begins to consume somebody's life and their thinking. It becomes like a pathological preoccupation. Let's say they are addicted to sports betting and horse racing is their thing. So betting on the races. And if you've known this person before they started betting on races, you will see a progression over time where that's kind of all they want to talk about. And it seems like that's maybe all that they think about. And suddenly the only people they're hanging out with are other folks at the racetrack. And the only thing they do with their time, or at least their off time, if they're not working, is go to the track or look at the stats or whatever all is involved with horse racing. Increased amount of time and energy until it basically consumes their life. The second C is control. Folks typically feel really helpless when they're active in their addiction. We may not realize it, but the majority of people who are active in their addiction don't want to be. They want to be in recovery, but recovery is hard to come by. Treatment is not available for many people. It's very expensive. It takes oftentimes more than 1 round of treatment. So nobody wakes up in the morning, I guarantee you this, and says, today I'm going to act out my addiction. And what a great day it's going to be. That is not how it goes. Most mornings, folks wake up, if they're active in their addiction, they probably feel physically terrible, psychologically terrible. They want to have a healthy, meaningful life, but they've lost control because of their brain, the parts of their brain that have to do with controlling these behaviors has become ill. So they don't have the control that they want. They try to stop and they fail. They try to reduce their use or their engagement with those behaviors and they fail. They lie, they try to hide it because they want to be healthy and they can't be. They've lost control. And then the last C is the negative consequences. And I'm sure this is familiar because it's in every movie where anybody has an addiction, where we see people having all kinds of negative consequences in their life because of their addiction, yet they continue acting out the addiction. So it impacts relationships. Let's think about Tori's mom. So she lost custody, apparently, of her daughter, because I think at one point in that video, her grandmother said that they had permanent custody, or that when Tori came to live with us permanently. So her mother lost custody of Tori. Their relationship will be impacted, as I said, likely forever. I'd be real surprised if her mother didn't have legal issues going on that may be impacting her employment situation, her physical health, her spiritual health, her mental health. All of these areas are impacted, yet people continue to use because they don't have the control anymore, because it's a symptom of a brain-based disease. So how is addiction considered a family disease? We've seen a little bit of that already with Tori and her mom and their story, because everybody in that family system has been affected by Tori's mother's addiction, by Tori's uncle's addiction. Clearly, the grandparents were affected because, first of all, they're raising the granddaughter. They lost a son to addiction, and they're probably terrified for Tori's mother that she will relapse and maybe die as well. So everybody in that system, and Tori herself, clearly, very, very impacted. So we're going to watch another short video, this time about a family where I'm guessing, let's go with teenager, has what looks like a cannabis use disorder. That looks like a bong, so that we're talking about marijuana here. And I just want to say that as I absolutely love this presenter. He's an amazing addiction treatment professional, works with hundreds of families who have a loved one in treatment. But this video was made a few years ago now. And one thing that's different that I just want to mention is that we don't use some of the words that you'll hear him use in this video. We don't use this language anymore, and I'm sure he doesn't either. He uses the word addict, and we don't use that word anymore because one word never defines a whole person, no matter what the one word is, a positive word or a negative word. We are each of us a universe, as we're taught rabbinically. So we don't use one word to label an entire person. And he uses the word enabler, same thing. We don't use one word to define a person. He uses the word codependency. In fact, that's part of the title of this video. And that's a word we think differently about now. So I just wanted to give you that heads up. But let's go ahead and watch this video.
One of the first things I like to do when I start working with new parents is to help them get clear about how addictive behavior affects the entire family system. I have this presentation I call the 8-second lecture on chemical dependency. It goes something like this. Here's the addict. Here's the addict's chemical. Addiction is this person's life begins to revolve around the use of the chemical. It's that simple. My experience is that usually by the time I'm done drawing this circle, family members are starting to nod and they say, yep, that's it. And then I'll say, since we saved so much time on that, we can move ahead to the 8-second lecture on codependency, which goes something like this. And unfortunately, this person has other people in his life. And the 8-second lecture on codependency is these people's lives begin to revolve around this person's life, which is revolving around the use of the chemical. What kind of day these people have depends on what kind of day this guy has, which depends on his relationship with the mood-altering substance at the time. They are, in a sense, codependent. And that's codependency at its most base definition. You can't argue with that. And again, it's my experience that when I draw that second circle, family members start really nodding. They really get that one. You may be having that experience right now as you're seeing this for the first time. But we also need to go a little further and take a look at what's going on emotionally here. Anytime there's an addiction in a family system, there are going to be a lot of unresolved feelings that can easily end up getting displaced. The people around the substance user are going to be angry, they're hurt, they're scared. Some of them might be feeling guilty or ashamed. And again, those are just the feelings that are directly related to the substance user. But then there's also going to be a lot of stuff going on between the individual family members. The diagram here shows a real common dynamic we see when the client's a teen or a young adult, and that's the parents who aren't on the same page as far as how they're dealing with the issue. You know, one's usually the tough guy and one's usually the enabler, and that can end up causing some pretty significant problems in their relationship. Or on the other hand, if the substance user is an adult in the family, there's a ton of different ways that relationships are damaged. Kids might be mad at the other parent for allowing the problem to continue. Or the kids could be mad thinking that the other parent's being too mean by making mom or dad go to treatment, and they end up choosing sides. And then it's not uncommon to see that kind of alignment or triangulation go on throughout the family. Adult siblings stop talking to each other. In-laws might chime in with their opinion about what's going on. So you see what this can end up looking like. Then we can't leave out the person who's actually at the center of all this. Even though they're identified as one who's causing all the problems, they've got feelings too. They're probably angry, mostly because of how the people around them are responding to their behavior. But underneath that, there's a good chance they're scared, because on some level, they probably realize that they keep messing up and they're not able to stop, and they're not sure that they're ever going to be able to change. Add to that, then, they probably got some guilt and shame about their behavior, but they're sure not going to let on to that. Then there's the underlying issues that might be the whole reason that they're using in the first place. And the bottom line is, this whole family system becomes just a mess of unresolved feelings. And that's what we've got when a family enters into treatment. And so
All right. So a little bit more about how addiction is a family.
value of this 8-second lecture on
Let's get past this. So I think one of the most important things he said in that video is when all those arrows with all the unresolved feelings. And he said, and all of that isn't even talking about whatever kinds of feelings and issues may have been there before the addiction even started, or what might have kicked off the addiction in the first place. And any treatment program worth its salt will have what they call a family program, where they bring all these family members, the parents or the kids or the grandparents, whoever is really actively involved with that family, to the treatment setting to educate them about addiction and to give them opportunities to talk with other families and with treatment professionals about what was it like for you to have this parent with addiction or your child with addiction, and how are you doing with that now, and what do you think caused it, and how can we heal and help your whole family to function better? Because if you just help the one person who has the substance use disorder or the other addictive behavior, and then you send them back into a family with all that mess of feelings swirling around and the unresolved original problems, whatever they might have been, the chance of relapse for that person who just got discharged from treatment are really high. So we want to treat the whole family. And another kind of, well, not treatment exactly, but help for families are, of course, support meetings, all kinds of support meetings, some facilitated by professionals and lots that are free out in the community, peer support meetings, for example. And the ones I put here on this slide are support meetings that are either specifically for Jewish families or that are enticing for Jewish families because they take place in synagogues. One of the things that I do in my role at JCFS in Addiction Services is to encourage Jewish organizations that have buildings like synagogues or other communal organizations, JCCs, et cetera, to host peer support recovery meetings like 12-step meetings, like Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or Marijuana Anonymous, all the anonymous meetings. And thankfully, we do have quite a number of meetings in quite a number of Jewish communal organizations here in Chicago. In fact, more than any other city in the country, because we've made that a mission of ours. And for family members, 2 of the 12-step meetings that are based on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous are Al-Anon, which is typically for the spouses of somebody with an alcohol use disorder. And there is an Al-Anon meeting at Temple Sholem in the city and at Temple Jeremiah here in the suburbs in Northfield. And the other 12-step meeting that is for families is called Families Anonymous. And in our area, Families Anonymous tends to attract parents who have adolescent or young adult children who are struggling with addiction. And there are a lot of Jewish families. There's a Families Anonymous meeting at North Shore Congregation Israel in Glencoe, and also at Temple Jeremiah in Northfield. And these are very large meetings, so there appears to be a pretty big need. I was recently told by one of our volunteers that there are 60 people showing up every week at Temple Jeremiah for their Families Anonymous meeting. That's big for a 12-step meeting. And I just want to be sure you understand that 12-step meetings are for the general public, not just for Jewish folks. So we can't say how many Jews are going to these meetings, but a lot of 12-step meetings are in churches. And, there are some Jews for whom that doesn't matter. They're perfectly comfortable going into a church to go to an Al-Anon meeting. But for others, that's not comfortable. So we felt like it was important for the Jewish community to offer up the option for a Jewish space to go to one of these open to the public 12-step meetings. And then underneath those meetings is what I'm calling national online meetings that are by and for the Jewish community. So these are meetings just for the Jewish community, created by the Jewish community. And here are 2 examples. There's an organization quite new, maybe 3 years old, I'm going to guess, called Our Jewish Recovery. It started as a Facebook page by a rabbi named Elon Glazer. And he has since also built a website, and now you can join, so it can be membership or you don't have to. And they have lots of peer support meetings all week long, all different kinds of peer support meetings. And one of the meetings is for adults who were raised in a home with parental addiction. So when Tori grows up, she could go to a meeting like this. Now, not this one, of course, because she's not Jewish, but it would be for somebody like her when they become an adult. And then there's an organization, this last one on the slide, called JAX. JAX was started decades ago with a real mouthful of a name, because JAX stands for Jewish Alcoholics, Chemically Dependents, and Significant Others. And that's why we call it JAX. And JAX meetings are all over the country. They're independent of each other. Started in New York City, actually. But some of the JAX meetings have gone online since COVID and stayed online. And all JAX meetings are for all Jews and all recovery. So if you are in Al-Anon because your spouse has an alcohol use disorder and you're finding your recovery in Al-Anon, but you want to go also to a Jewish space to talk to other Jews in other recovery, you can go to a JAX meeting. And you'll be there with other folks who are married to folks with alcohol use disorder, or you could be the parent of somebody who's struggling, or you could be in recovery yourself from marijuana, from cannabis use disorder. All Jews, all recovery, all together to talk about what is it like to be Jewish in recovery. So a little more about the Jewish experience. Of course, there is this myth that doesn't seem to want to die, that we've been touching on throughout our presentation today, that somehow addiction doesn't impact the Jewish community, or at least not as much as other communities. And that's simply not the case. The data doesn't bear that out. Our experience doesn't bear that out. And in some ways, the Jewish community is more at risk for certain kinds of addiction. For one thing, in our North American Jewish culture, we have a lot of shame and stigma still around addiction, more than some other parts of the North American community as a whole. Folks who have addiction feel more shame because they feel like, I'm Jewish, I'm not supposed to have addiction, right? That's not a Jewish thing, even though it is. And unfortunately, those of us who do not have addiction still hold a lot of stigma for those who do. And the problem with the shame and stigma is that it keeps people from coming forward early in the addiction process to get help. And we know that the sooner somebody gets into treatment, the better the chances that they'll get into recovery and stay in recovery. So early treatment really matters. So reducing shame and stigma really matters. It matters for saving lives. Also in the Jewish community, medications, prescription medications, legit prescription medications, are very accessible. We have a lot of doctors. We're fortunate as a community as a whole. This is a generality, but still, we're fortunate to have good medical care and to get prescription meds when we need them. But what that means is that as a community, there's a lot of medication floating around. And some of these meds, the pain meds, the sleep meds, these have high addictive profiles. And they tend to be hanging out in our medicine cabinets, very easy for folks to get to who shouldn't be getting to them. So that is a concern within the Jewish community in particular. And then lastly, and again, a gross generalization, but I think you'll know what I mean, and especially here on the North Shore, what I call keeping up with the Goldbergs. And this has less to do with the alcohol and other substance use disorders, and more to do with those, what we call behavioral addictions, the shopping and the spending and the screen time and the gambling and the work addiction that we didn't even mention. Because we have this idea that we are supposed to maintain a certain lifestyle. We're supposed to live in a certain kind of house. We're supposed to dress and look a certain way. If one chooses to go the full-on Jewish lifestyle route with Jewish day school, Jewish camp, lots of trips to Israel, that's really expensive. All of these things make the Jewish community more vulnerable to social media addiction, because that's a big part of being a young adult or a teen and looking good to keep up with the Goldbergs, and the work addiction and the gambling disorders, because it's expensive to maintain this kind of lifestyle, even without the Jewish day schools. But if one really feels driven to live in a fancy North Shore home and dress one's family in beautiful ways and take really lovely trips, that can put a lot of pressure on the earners in the family. And if looking good matters, then exercise addiction and eating problems are really, really, really endemic. They are epidemic in our community because of this particular aspect of the North American Jewish culture. Okay, so coming to the end now, the other way that the Jewish community is in some ways more vulnerable is because of our own traditions, because we have wine. We have wine for almost all of our holidays. Certainly at Seder, which you see a depiction of here with the 4 cups of wine. Every Shabbat, there's a Kiddush with wine. And this makes people vulnerable. There are lots of folks that I've worked with who said that their very first taste of wine was at Seder or at Kiddush on Shabbat, and that they were exposed to wine earlier than they might have been otherwise when they were a kid, because it was like okay in their family or in their synagogue community to let the kids taste the wine at Seder, for example. And that's frankly a terrible idea, but it's still the custom in a lot of Jewish communities. So what does a welcoming synagogue community look like for alcohol in particular, since ritual and recreational alcohol use is present all the time. First, being well educated on sensitive topics. So that's exactly what y'all are doing here. So kol hakavod to Makom. A good, welcoming, safe community will involve people who have the lived experience. So if you're thinking to yourself, what can we do at Macomb to do more support, more programming for the families who are struggling with addiction in our community? And if you don't know that there are families at Macomb who are struggling, I guarantee you there are, because there are in every single synagogue community. Because we're people just like everybody else, right? We struggle with addiction too. So if you're wondering, what can you do new? What can you do different? And you're not sure, well, ask the folks who do know. Ask the folks who have somebody in recovery in their family, or who are in recovery themselves, or who have a loved one who is still active in their addiction. What do they need? Invite them in. However, Macomb reaches out to the whole synagogue community, put out a call. If you've struggled with addiction, if you're in recovery, we want to hear from you. Involve folks with the lived experience. And then be smart and safe about alcohol use in all of your programming. Always have a non-alcohol alternative. Don't name your programs something that clearly says or implies that this program is all about alcohol. Just for liability's sake, that's a terrible idea. But it also sends the message that we're here about drinking. And think about all the folks who won't feel welcome or who really wouldn't be safe at a program like that because maybe they're early in their recovery. And being around alcohol is not safe for them because it increases their chance of relapse. And celebrate recovery. This is something we don't think about, but recovery thrives in community. So if there's a family at Macomb who has somebody in treatment and that person gets discharged after having been out at Beit Tshuva in Los Angeles for 3 months, and they finally get discharged and they're home and it's the first Shabbat, maybe they would be okay being welcomed up onto the bima to have everybody sing a Shehechianu for them in their recovery. Now, that's a little bit far-fetched, to tell you the truth. I don't know a lot of families who are willing to be that publicly acknowledged for having just clawed their way out of addiction and into recovery. But even if they're not willing, but the rabbi, for example, knows about this family, they could ask that family, would you be comfortable with us all singing a Shechianu if I don't even mention that it's you? But just to say, there is a family in our community that is newly in recovery. We want to let them know that we care, we love them. So let's all sing a Shechianu for this family. Why not? And what can you do to help? What you can do is the same thing you do for any other family who's struggling with any other thing, because addiction it's a kugel disease too. Just like you would bring a kugel to a family that has another medical condition. In other words, providing meals. So the first thing you do to help, you ask the person in that family that you're closest to, is something, going on? And hopefully they'll say, yes, thank you for asking. I needed to talk to somebody. They may say, no, I don't want to talk. Everything's fine, even if you know that it's not. But that's okay. It's their choice. But you've opened the door. So they know that they can come back to you at any point if they do want to talk. And if they do tell you, of course, you're a good listener and you hear what they have to say. And then you have resources at hand. And what that really means is that you remember me. And if you don't remember me, you remember that Vanessa will remember me. Or you remember JCFS had this addiction person. And so you call JCFS, or you help this person in the family. You go with them to the phone to call JCFS, and you say to the JCFS access main line, didn't you have an addiction person there? Can you connect us? And they know me. They'll find me. And then you give them the concrete help, the meals, and drive the kids around and walk the dogs, all the things that you do for any other family that is struggling. And although addiction is agonizing and hard to treat, the CDC and NIDA have found 75% of people who experience addiction find recovery. 75%. That's an amazing statistic. And I absolutely love this last quote, and this is how we'll end. We are literally surrounded by people who are in recovery, but we don't know it. Because folks who are in recovery are just going about their lives. They seem fine. We may not know that they're going to a meeting every single night, to their AA meeting every night. We may not know all of the things that they're doing to keep their recovery strong and healthy, but they're there. They're all around us, which is an amazing thing. Now, we do just have a few minutes for questions. I'm going to stop my screen sharing. And this is how to find me. But again, you don't need to remember. You just need to remember Vanessa or JCFS, and you would be able to find me.
I put the JCFS website in the chat, but I'm always here and happy to hook you up with Beth. And what a great presentation. I always learn. I have been through, what is that program? Community Caring, the program we did as synagogue professionals.
Oh, the Safer Synagogues?
Safer Synagogues.
Mhm.
And one thing that I'll just share with you off the bat is after we went through that program, we realized that we've always had, you know, in this day and age, we have many b'nai mitzvah. Those are young kids. They're up on the bima Friday night, Saturday morning, and we only make kiddush over grape juice. And you know, I always feel good when I say that fact, and I always feel that it's an important thing that we do.
It's so important. In fact, I worked with a synagogue, a Safer Synagogues session where I train synagogue professionals, the clergy, the other professional staff, about being smart with alcohol. And this was many years ago. There was a rabbi who they were doing a great job about being safe and smart around alcohol, but he said, but that one kiddush, the one blessing over the wine at the bar or bat mitzvah, that one was always wine because he felt like that was such a holy moment. That one should always be wine. And I thought, oh boy. And I said to him, so let's say the next bat mitzvah that's coming up is a family where the mother has been 3 weeks sober, 3 weeks. And the only way she's maintaining her recovery is to stay away from wine. And this 12-year-old girl who's becoming a bat mitzvah knows that at the end of her ceremony, you, the rabbi, are about to hand her mother the drug of choice. And that mother may relapse right there at her bat mitzvah because you're insisting on it being wine. And that rabbi just went white as a sheet. God bless him. He got it immediately. And from that moment on, it was a choice between wine and they didn't go all the way to just grape juice. That's always an option, but at least always the choice where it had not been a choice before.
I mean, the blessing is fruit of the vine, and that is a
That's
grape.
right.
So, and that's obviously where wine comes from as well. Do we have any questions? You know, you can raise your hand virtually or wave to me. And if not, we're getting towards the end of the hour, but can you tell us more about Beit Teshuvah, Beth? Because I know that when Adam Nimoy comes, I assume he's going to talk about it because I'm going to ask him about it. So.
Absolutely. I've been to Beit Shuvah, the Jewish Treatment Center in Los Angeles, many times. I know Rabbi Mark and Harriet, and there's new leadership now. We've worked really closely with them. What's so interesting about Beit Shuvah is that it isn't just a Jewish treatment center, which is interesting enough, but it's also a synagogue. So the one building, which is enormous, houses right in the very center of their building is the sanctuary with the Ark, the Torah scrolls, the Bima, all of it. And then there's treatment rooms and the residences where the folks in treatment live. It's beautiful space. But you can belong to Beit Shuvah Synagogue, even if you have no affiliation with the addiction part of it, because it's a really lively, exciting place. Or your affiliation can be just through the treatment. And if you're in treatment at Beit Shuvah, you have to do Torah study every morning, led by the head rabbi. Every morning,
Wow.
everybody goes to Torah study, no matter what. And actually, it isn't just for Jews. There are non-Jewish folks who go to treatment there, but I tell you what, every morning there are Torah study. And everybody goes to Shabbat services, Friday night and Shabbat morning. Everybody who is in treatment there goes to services. It's right there. It's on site in the sanctuary in the middle of the space. So it's a really fascinating weaving together
I'm
of,
just gonna share some pictures.
oh, wow,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, they, not too long ago, well, I guess it's probably close to 10 years ago now. Yeah, there's the sanctuary space right in the middle of the treatment program. It's a very, very interesting model. I don't know of another
That's
one
very,
like it.
yeah, so 12 step
Yep,
on their
12 steps
logo.
up. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing amazing work there.
Yeah. I had heard about it, lo these many years, and I do think it's it's something great and something that we should know about. I hope that people feel more free to talk about this. There are still some taboo, whether it be addiction or mental health, and of course, addiction affects your mental health. So I just want to thank you for presenting, Beth, in such clear-cut terms, and I think I know I'm better educated, so when Adam comes in a couple of weeks, I'll have many tools at my handy to talk to him and to share with him.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Like I said,
Yeah.
we can always bring more awareness to the Jewish community on
Absolutely.
this topic. So
I
thank
mean,
you so
I don't know if
much.
you could see me. I was just agreeing with everything you said, that people don't think it's a Jewish disease, that people don't think this and that, and that there are, listen, I happen to know some of the people who are in treatments, but there's even more out there that I don't know. I did think it was a little hopeful thinking that after they were in treatment, they'd come for a Shechianu, but if anyone wanted to do that, we would be so open to that.
I know it's a reach, but hey,
It's a
why not?
reach, a good reach. All right, Beth, thanks so much. I'll be in touch. You're getting some
All
good
right.
thank yous. And well, next week we're in person. At 10 o'clock, 9:30, Lox and Bagels, and Eugene Finnerman will be talking about what does it mean to celebrate Hanukkah now, which is a little bit in the future. All right. I will, if you have any questions, you know where to get me. Great seeing everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Such a
Bye-bye.
great presentation. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much.